Welcome back, Ways and Weeboos, to Challenge and Doge, where today we're covering something a bit different. I don't usually do this, especially because I don't even have a face cam, but we're doing a bit of a reaction to a video by a small channel called SoloWolo. Shout outs to them, I guess. This is a new experience. I don't think I've actually ever watched a channel. I've done a react video like this before, but only to bigger channels before, so this is a new experience. But they made a video on 5 rules to fix Overwatch 2. And I'll be quite transparent, I think it was pretty good, but there are some things I want to add that weren't in the original video. We're mostly on the same page with a lot of these takes, especially because it seems like he got a lot of these takes from Flats, Spilo, and the Group Up podcast, which is like the exact same 3 places I would tell you to go if you're looking for good takes on Overwatch. I feel like Flats, Spilo, and the people at the Group Up podcast almost always have the best takes on the game. I feel like they always are very thoughtful, considerate of all roles, and really look at the root of a lot of the problems with the game rather than just looking at a balance change and going, this is stupid, you know? So yeah. That being said, I obviously am going to cut out a decent amount of this video or speed up a decent amount of parts because I don't just want to steal this video. It's going to be more about my commentary. With all that said, I think we can just go. Yeah, let's give this a shot.
Much of the discussion around Overwatch 2's balance is muddled and increasingly unproductive. So what do I mean by that? Well, the focus of this video is to spark a conversation. I'm looking to augment the balance philosophy we as players use to discuss Overwatch.
I will just I know I'm already pausing. I will just very quickly say, I think that this isn't actually completely true. I do think that there is a bit of muddling going on in the discussion, and it's not always super productive. Maybe it's just because I watch, like, the content I like to watch in terms of Overwatch tends to be more from the people who like to talk about the state of the game and the direction it's going in and all that, and so they tend to be more informed on it. But in my opinion, it isn't actually getting increasingly muddled and, like, you know, unproductive. I actually do think it's slow and painful, but we're going in the other direction, where people actually are getting better at picking up on the issues. Although, certainly, there's still a lot of people who do just like to look at the patch notes, see a change to a character that they didn't want to see nerfed or buffed, and then complain about it without taking any note of the broader context. But there's nothing new under the sun there. And I feel like that is a less common occurrence than it used to be. So I think I would lightly disagree on that point, but I mean, whatever. It's not super important. I'll let him go on.
The player base of Overwatch is vast, variable, and volatile, ranging from middle-aged fathers to teenage esports prodigies strapped to gaming toilets. As such, to facilitate a productive dialogue, I want to present a framework for how we as players approach crafting balanced concepts and suggestions. In essence, we all play video games to have fun, but where that fun comes from varies. The perspective of every player deserves to be heard. My goal is to supply the tools of constructive criticism, not to speak for everybody. This video has 2
Already, I think that there might be some people who might disagree with the idea of hearing everyone's perspectives. Because certainly, usually when we talk about balancing the game, we talk about, like, only top-level play. But I think I actually agree with this sentiment. I'm going to say, obviously, I think we should put further importance and weight on the opinions of top-level players. But also, I feel like you see, we got this balancing act always going on with Overwatch, where it's like, well, we got to make it fun for for everyone, but we also got to make the game balanced for the top-level players. And these sometimes can kind of contradict. But here's the thing. For a lot of the more casual players, while they prefer the game to be fair, because they are casuals, they also don't really care as much about the game being fair, which is why I think it's fair enough to say we should put more importance on the balancing opinions of the more experienced players. But here's the thing. Even for the, like, bronze and silver players, while we probably shouldn't take their advice for balance changes, we should still hear what their opinions are about the state of the game, because it can give us an idea of how we can change the design of characters so that there isn't a complete, like, awful disparity that we can't fix between how these characters play at lower ranks and how they play at higher ranks, to the point where they make the game unfun for a large part of the casual player base, just because a character is balanced when you actually know how to play against them, but most casuals don't know how to play against them. That kind of thing. I mean, Moira's an obvious example of this, a character that to any brand new Overwatch player seems stupidly broken until you get to the top ranks and realize she's probably the single worst support in the entire game because she has no utility, and yes, it might be easy to do damage with her, but that's the thing, it's easy. If you actually start, landing more shots on other characters, the DPS on Moira starts to fall behind until she's one of the lowest DPS supports you can get. And when you combine that with the fact she has no utility, an ult that's okay but underwhelming compared to the competition in the category, and the fact that while she does have a lot of healing, there are a lot of people who can compete for her on that healing, and a lot of those people, like Anna, actually have ranged healing rather than close, like, range healing where they have to be right in your face to get healed. Yeah, you can see how Moira falls apart. But still, that doesn't change the fact that to a bronze player, Moira probably ruins their games. To a bronze player, they probably fucking hate Moira, and they'd be happier if they woke up tomorrow and she was gone from the game. You know, it doesn't really change that fact. So I definitely think that while Moira isn't a pressing concern because of the fact that she's not even relevant at top ranks, that doesn't mean we can kind of just look at Moira and just go, dust off our hands and just go, well, you know, problem solved, not a problem at top ranks, so we can just ignore the fact that they make a lot of lower ranked players miserable.
Two parts. First, I'll present 5 rules to guide the balance debate. In the second part, I'll provide examples of my rules in action. Together, we'll dive deeper into the philosophy of Overwatch balance. But before we begin,
this is actually, I already want to say this is a great idea. This sounds really simple, like, and, you know, expected. Okay, we're going to set up rules and then talk about how we're going to use those rules. But this is literally, I think, well, yeah, no, I'll say it. I think this is my biggest problem with the Overwatch balance right now, is I feel like this is too vague, but I think by virtue of it being vague, it kind of acts as an umbrella term for every problem I have with the balance. And that is that the devs do not have a philosophy. They pretend that they have a balanced philosophy, but they don't. I mean, how many times have they gone back on their own stated values? They said going into Overwatch 2 they wanted to reduce the value of hard counters and make it so that's less of a thing in the game. And then what did we see in Overwatch 2? We saw tank counter swapping become the main strategy and almost nothing done to curtail it, which that wasn't a great start. And now, moving forward, more and more we're getting messaging from the balance team that seems to suggest they're fine with the idea that some characters just make other characters' lives miserable and hard counter them. Which, yeah, that definitely doesn't look great. I think a lack of philosophy is also why some of these reworks, like the Roadhog rework, maybe don't completely flail, but definitely flop a bit and disappoint, because, quite frankly, they did not achieve the goals they set out to with the Roadhog rework. Whether you are one of the people who liked it, because I know most people did, and I'm, you know, in the minority by saying I preferred the old Roadhog, you can't deny the fact that the developers said that their goal with the Roadhog rework was to reduce the power within his one-shot and shift that power into something else, while also making him more of a team player that actually has, you know, abilities to help out his team and help create space. Did they achieve that? Well, no. They gave him his one-shot back without even needing to have any skill to set it up like you needed before with the nerfed Roadhog but pre-rework Roadhog, where you could only one-shot certain characters at certain angles, or if you perform certain hook techs, or if you manage to get the right, like, you know, like, you kind of push them against a wall while hooking them so they appear closer to you. Stuff like that. Little niches like that. If you knew how to do that, you could still get the one-shot with the nerfed Roadhog, but your average Roadhog couldn't abuse that anymore. And even your skilled Roadhog would need to outsmart a player thoroughly to be able to pull that off. Whereas the new Roadhog just gave him back his one-shot when they said they wanted to move his power away from that, but they just put it on a 12-second cooldown because now you need Pigpen to get the one-shot. And it's kind of like, so you've reduced the skill in trying to get the one-shot, you've made it easier to get, but you placed a limit on how often we're able to get it. Now it's only every 12 seconds, you know? This was my complaint about it in the last video, is that I feel like it just makes it so the game is less about your own skill and more about whether you have abilities or not. And clearly that doesn't address the thing they set out to address, the one-shot. They just gave him a one-shot that you can't get as often, but he still has a one-shot, it just requires him to use Hook and Pigpen, you know? It's not solved the problem. And as well as that, they said they wanted to make him more of a team player. They wanted to actually make him a tank that helps his team push forward and actually supports them a bit more instead of being selfish. And yet, did they do anything to him to do that? They definitely experimented with ideas that would maybe make Roadhog a bit more of a team player, but they ended up implementing 0 of them. Roadhog is still just as selfish as he used to be. The only argument you can maybe make is, well, I suppose maybe sometimes, in extremely rare circumstances, you can use Pigpen to slow an enemy so they can't get to one of your supports, but when does that happen? When do you just drop a Pigpen in front of an enemy running at one of your supports? They walk into the Pigpen, and then the support lives because of the fact that the Pigpen slowed them. How often does that really happen? Basically never. Unless you hook them, but then if you were going to hook them, then you were already saving them. That's already how Roadhog did his job as an off-tank, was by hooking flankers to prevent them from killing his supports. So then nothing's changed. So they haven't made him more of a team player. They've just made him the exact same selfish tank with the exact same one-shot, but now the one-shot is less skill-based and more just, do you have the ability or not? Okay, I already spent a decent amount of time on that, but I think it's a good example of like a lack of philosophy really, really, really hurting them. And I think they just need to make some fucking decisions already. Like, I don't even mind that much if they don't go with the philosophies that I would hope for they would for the game. They just need to have consistent design philosophies. What are their goals with heroes? Because I feel like they're always very vague with their goals, and even while they are vague with them, they still manage to contradict them on the regular.
Begin. I want to put forth some questions for you to ponder throughout the video. What is fun in the context of Overwatch? How do we craft concepts that solve issues for the long term? And can we balance this game to be both fun and competitively viable? Currently though, I primarily play quick play. I peak at GM3 as support, with my tank and DPS role sitting at mid-diamond. If I were to just say, make the game fun and call it a day, that wouldn't be very helpful now, would it? Instead, I'm going to boil down my definitions of fun Overwatch into these 5 fundamental rules. Each of these is essential to inform balanced concepts and criticisms conducive to improving the game. 1. Each role must be defined and consistent.
Yes. Okay, I like this rule. I like this rule because, okay, this is a weird one. I think that Overwatch has never actually been very good at being clear on what its roles are supposed to do. And I understand that's partially probably intentional, because it's incoherent and irrelevant to a brand new player. But at the end of the day, I think it is important to have it on the record somewhere what they actually want these roles to be doing, in detail, not just in vague terms, because I think it's important rules to follow. So I was going to leave this until when he talks about his idea of what all the roles do, but I feel like I should give this right now, because it's important that you understand my understanding. Now, he gives a bit of a different take to mine, but pretty close to my opinion on what the roles are supposed to be doing. And I think I actually half agree with it, but just for the sake of being transparent, I'll give what my take was before watching this video. And that was that I saw the tank role obviously is the role that made space. The tank role is the one that's the most awkward to define, because the thing is that every tank, there's like 4 different archetypes of tank, which really, if we were being strict, should all be their own different roles, but obviously they aren't, because that's too many roles to keep track of. You know, you got your dive tanks like Winston, D.Va, Bull, and Doomfist, but then you've also got your anchor tanks like Reinhardt and Sigma and Ramatra, and they just play completely differently, and clearly, while they do make space just like dive tanks, they do it in a completely different way. And then you've got your off tanks, or as I like to call them now, bodyguard tanks, since the concept of an off tank is kind of irrelevant now that we only have one tank. But essentially the tanks that mostly exist to use abilities to keep their teammates alive, but aren't necessarily as good at just holding a spot consistently as an anchor tank. People like Zarya, who can use bubbles to temporarily hold their ground, but can't just sit around in a spot forever, just holding up a shield or whatever, because they don't have one. They just have bubbles that run out very quickly. So while they're very powerful when they're able to push in, and they're very good at keeping their teammates alive for short bursts of time, they just don't have the sustain to keep up their ground in the long term. These are like the 3 main categories. There's obviously further categories. You got your brawl tanks and all that, but a lot of them start to overlap and become sort of like just different flavors of already existing things. So those are the big 3 categories: your dive, your anchor tanks, and your bodyguard tanks. Now, that was a bit verbose, but that was the most complicated role. When it comes to the DPS role, a lot of people obviously just talk it up to it's the role that gets kills and does damage, but I actually don't think it's that simple, although it's close to that. I think that the DPS role, I would describe them as the problem solvers. Essentially, yeah, it's fine to get kills on DPS and just do damage, and that's what you should be doing by default when nothing's happened yet, but a lot of the times, when someone shows up on the enemy team that is a problem, that as long as they exist, they can shut down the tank or your supports, then it's the DPS's job to deal with it. If there's a Widowmaker who's just sniping the head off of your Ana all the time, and your tank can't reach them, and isn't playing a dive tank like Winston to jump on them, then it's your job as DPS to be someone like Genji, Sombra, Tracer, whatever, and go after that Widow. If there is a pharmacy absolutely terrorizing your tank, and they can't do shit because they're in the sky, and they're a tank with no range, then it's your job as a hit scan DPS to shoot them out the sky. You get the idea. DPS are problem solvers. They tend to be able to get around a lot more easily than other people in the game, and they use that mobility and that range and that higher damage output to be able to find issues, like find enemies that are causing a big problem for your team and shut them down. Lastly, there's supports. And supports is a bit of a weird one because, well, it's quite simple at first. They're just the ones that do healing, but they also have some damage. That seemed about it. And they provide utility to the team. Now, everyone provides utility, but clearly supports provide a little bit more than everyone else. So that seemed like, oh yeah, that's what supports do. And I think it was in Overwatch 1, but I do think there's one other thing added to the list in Overwatch 2. I think supports are also the new off-tanks. The job of the off-tank wasn't to make space per se, but to maintain space. There would usually be a tank paired with the main tank, and the main tank would be the one to actually get in there, make space, cause havoc, and take like areas of the map from the enemy team, whereas the off-tank would usually follow behind the main tank and just act as a tank that would punish anyone who would try to sneak past the main tank. So let's say, you know, your main tank's a Reinhardt and you've got a Zarya as well. That's a classic combo, Rein-Zarya from Overwatch 1. If you had a Reinhardt charging forward and there was an enemy Genji on the enemy team, if the Genji was feeling ballsy, they could just try and dash past the Reinhardt, completely ignore him, and then kill his supports, and then loop back to kill him once he has no one healing him. And that actually could be a problem for the Reinhardt. However, the off-tank Zarya would obviously be able to stop that in that situation, because they would be able to simply bubble the supports if the Genji went for them, and completely deny him getting the kill, which would obviously lead to the Genji likely dying before he could get out. Now, that's kind of the purview of supports in Overwatch 2. Supports act as their own off-tanks to protect them, rather than needing to rely on an off-tank. I mean, think about it. If you just can't fucking kill a support in a game, no matter what you do and no matter how many shots you land, why is it most of the time? Is it because the tank is peeling for them? Sometimes, but not usually. A lot of the time, it's because their Life Weaver is life gripping them. It's because their Brig is shield bashing you and whip-shotting you away and holding up their shield in front of them. It's because their Baptiste is hitting them with a regen burst or an immortality field. It's because their Alari has a healing pylon permanently sat next to them. Almost always, the reason you can't fucking kill a support in Overwatch 2 is because the other support uses abilities to make them unkillable to you, which once again means the other support is the off-tank now. But either way, that's the dynamic I see between all three of the roles in this game, as well as a little bit of a peek into the sub-roles. Speaking of which, just to be thorough, since I already mentioned most of them, in supports there are also sub-roles. Most people just go off of main heal and off heal, with like main heal being, you know, high healing output characters and off heal being low healing output characters. But that's just sort of in casual situations, and while I think it's helpful for casual games, most people in more high-level games go off of main support and flex support, with main supports being more shot callers. They're typically considered to be Brig, Lucio, and Mercy, the main supports, and essentially they're considered more shot callers because as a Lucio, you obviously have speed, so where your speed aura goes is important, so you have to tell the team, okay, I'm going in for an attack here, everyone come with me and stuff like that. Mercy, of course, going for reses and damage boost communication is important, and Brig, because obviously you are the most off-tank support in the game, so you kind of act as a mini second tank, although it's not a tank to make space, it's a tank to maintain space, importantly. Don't make the mistake of misinterpreting that as run at the enemies and swing as Brig and that's how you play Brig, because it is not. Whereas the rest of the supports in the game are typically considered flex supports, where it's a lot more about just landing your shots and aiming and doing your job, rather than making necessarily shot calls. Although sometimes you can call some shots on certain flex supports. I think Ana's probably the best example, because obviously you might call out that you're going to go for a nade on the enemy team and tell everyone to push in once you land it, or you might get like a sleep dart and have to call out for a push based on a sleep dart you land. But obviously, a lot more it's on the side of the Mercies, the Lucios, the Brigs to be the main support. So sorry, that was quite long and exhaustive, but I wanted to be very thorough. This is also a good one. It's obvious, but I feel like it's not considered enough. A good example of this is, in my opinion, you know I love to take every opportunity to talk about how good I think Lifeweaver was conceptually, but how awful he's turned out in the process of them trying to make him a strong character. And I think that Tree of Life is a great example of that. Tree of Life is an ultimate that I feel is extremely unfun, anti-fun even. It lets the Lifeweaver have some impact, but the only way he gets to have impact isn't by really doing something, but rather than by denying the enemy team from doing something. You just don't let the enemy team kill people, but you don't really do anything yourself. That being said, I think it's even worse for everyone else, because when you drop a tree, for the enemy team, it's like, well, what's the point? Like, unless we can one-shot some of them to kill them instantly, or we can destroy the tree, there's no point in even trying to fight them. Let's just hide and wait for the tree to go away. And oftentimes, that's what people do. They just hide and wait for the tree to go away, and then they go in when the tree's gone. So, essentially, all the tree really does is just say, timeout, can't play the game for the next 10, 15 seconds, and then, oh, okay, it's over, you're allowed to play the game again, and it's like, oh, well, that's not very fun. But what's even worse is, not even your own team is really having fun, because while they're receiving healing, which might mean that they don't die, it also means that, well, now they don't really get to fight the enemies, because the enemies are all just going to go and hide. and what, they're supposed to chase them, but to do that they're going to leave the range of the tree, so that's probably a bad idea, so I guess they just sit there and wait. You know, it feels like the Tree of Life as an ultimate acts very much as just a stop button on the fight. Just stop, pause, no one fight. We just wait this out, just do a little bit of poking for about 15 seconds and then go back to actually playing the video game. And I think that's an example of a situation where they're not considering the impact of an ability on every player in the game. They're only considering, Lifeweaver doesn't feel like he has much impact, let's just make his ultimate heal more. And it's, you know, you expand out, see the bigger picture, and it's like, wow, this really takes away the enjoyment from every other player in the entire game.
Balance cannot be strictly numerical.
Okay. This one, I want to be clear, could go in a bad direction, because it is absolutely true that numbers changes can have huge impact. People don't really like to say it, because generally actual design changes are more fun and interesting, and a lot of the times they are needed, and obviously number changes can be the easy way out that doesn't actually address the problem. But it is absolutely true that there are plenty of numbers changes in this game that have significantly improved the enjoyment of the game, where a design change probably wasn't necessary and probably would have caused more issues. That being said, I think I'm fine with this rule, because the way that he talked about in this video, I'm going to skip past it for the sake of, you know, not taking too much of the video, but he makes it very clear that strictly is to be underlined here, that numbers changes are fine, but essentially that, you know, we shouldn't lean into them too hard. And while at first I thought that might have been like a, well, that's the obvious opinion, but I'm not sure if it's really correct, quote unquote, I was moved because they are over on that point, because he made a good point, which is that an over-reliance on numbers changes is how we got to the heal and damage power creep situation we're in right now. And I think I would agree on that, actually. You see, I've seen examples of numbers changes working, like the numbers changes to Sojourn's Railgun back when she first received her first actually significant nerf that actually knocked her out of being just triple S tier. That's an example of a good numbers change. But in fairness, a lot of the numbers changes are a bit more insidious, where they don't really cause an issue to start, but they cause issues down the lane. And so I think that he does have a point that a lot of these numbers changes are how we got damage and healing power creep. Because people don't like to see their characters get nerfed, they like to see them get buffed. So characters get buffed more often than they get nerfed. And a lot of characters, just, it feels like sometimes almost every patch, they just roll the random wheel of fortune and wait to see what it lands on. And it's like, oh, apparently we're changing this character this patch. Okay, let's just give him a random, like, out of left field buff to something, question mark. And usually in the patch that it comes out, the buff doesn't mean anything, but usually then, a few months later, that buff starts adding up with other buffs or other changes to the meta, and suddenly that character is an absolute menace and a nuisance. And so I do think that a lot of the problem we got into in the first place here with damage and heal power creep is just these incremental buffs to numbers that are completely unnecessary that characters keep getting without solving the base problems with those characters, which then eventually leads to every character just having way too high healing and damage numbers. Although I would like to add on to the end of that point that I think that while both are a problem, I've been moved over time. Towards the start of Season 6, I thought it was a equal problem between too much damage and too much healing. The longer the game has gone on past that point, I'm leaning more towards, while both is a problem, healing is a enormous problem and damage is a small problem. I do think damage is still too high, but I don't think damage needs to be reduced that much to get within a reasonable range. Whereas healing needs to be significantly reduced to get this game back to sane levels of healing numbers.
Fourth, control and counterplay are essential.
This is not controversial, but it is important to include, and it's absolutely true. I mean, there's not much to say. It doesn't feel good when you die and you know it wasn't your fault. It's just they have this thing by picking this character that simply makes me die if I'm this character. And it doesn't matter how well I play, I just die because I picked this character. You know, it never feels good.
Fifth, not everything needs a rework.
This might sound this is probably one of the ones that's a little bit more spicy to most people, but I actually think I mostly agree with the sentiment, although I would like to add an asterisk. I think that most reworks, every rework, the character comes out the other side better. But I do think there are a lot of reworks that there is an improvement, but a marginal one after a lot of work. A lot of the time, I feel like that happens when they clearly just don't have a good philosophy going in of like what they're even trying to do with the rework, and what the character they want the character to look like on the other end. And Roadhog is the most clear and obvious example of that. The stated goals of the Roadhog rework, as I mentioned, were not met. They wanted to make it so his one-shot wasn't as impactful, and they wanted to make it so that he was more of a team player, and they failed at both of those goals and then just pretended they didn't and didn't bring it up again. You know? So the Roadhog rework, whether you feel like he's better or not right now, clearly it didn't achieve the goals it set out to, and I think the biggest problem with it is that they wanted to maintain Roadhog's overall identity, which is the third goal that I didn't mention earlier. But the problem is, and I feel like this is kind of obvious, but literally these goals are mutually exclusive. Roadhog's current identity, or his current identity before the rework, and still now with the rework, was being the selfish tank who one-shots people. Like, literally, that was his identity. He was the tank you played if you just wanted to go off on your own, if you didn't want to have to bother with supporting your team, and if you wanted to go land hooks and then heal yourself. Now, obviously, if you played smart, you played with your team still as Roadhog, but let's be real. Most people who played Roadhog, especially at low to medium skill levels, just wanted to play a character who had a shit ton of health, who could heal himself and not be reliant on his supports, and who could just walk up to people and hook them and shoot. That's what a lot of like low to mid rank Roadhogs want to play the character for. And so, for that reason, it is literally mutually exclusive to say we want Roadhog's rework to maintain his original identity while also making his one-shot less important, while also making him more of a team player. His original identity literally is he one-shots people and he isn't a team player, and then they set their goals as maintain that old identity, but then also get rid of the one-shot and then also make him a team player. Literally, from the very beginning, clearly completely contradictory. And now, what's the solution to that? I would say the solution is that if you're going to do a Roadhog rework, you need to accept from the very beginning that Roadhog's identity was flawed, and that there's nothing you can do about that. Quite simply, from the very beginning, Roadhog was a poor idea, and his identity was never, like, something that should have existed in Overwatch. However, that doesn't mean he can't be fixed, it just means you have to change his identity. And you don't have to change it to something completely different. The new identity can be reminiscent of the old one. I mean, Roadhog can still be an absolute brute with loads of self-heal that doesn't need loads of help from his supports, and also be a team player. That's possible. You would just have to rework him in a certain way. Yes, there are downsides to scrapping his old identity. Obviously, some people are going to miss it. But there are certain times where you do just have to draw the line and say, there is no way this identity can exist in a healthy way with this game. And quite frankly, yeah, I think in a team-based shooter where you only have one tank now, where not having a tank is basically the quickest way to not even have a chance in a game, it is simply fundamentally an awful and unhealthy idea from the beginning to make it so there is a tank in the game whose whole identity is they don't help the team and they just one-shot people randomly when they want to. That was a dumb idea from the start. It only even kind of worked in Overwatch 1 because he was an off-tank, but now he can't even be an off-tank anymore, so picking Roadhog is just your team doesn't have a tank anymore. Now, of course, it wasn't really like that because they giga-buffed Roadhog so hard that he finally actually became good enough you could play him as a tank, mostly just because he killed people, not actually because he did tank things, not actually because he shielded teammates, provided them damage resistance, took space per se. For the most part, he just took space by getting kills, because, well, killing people takes space, as simple as it is. And he got kills because he was giga-buffed to hell and back, so you couldn't even challenge him from anywhere except a safe distance. When it comes to changes like that, you simply have to draw the line. You have to bite the bullet and you have to say, there are two things we want here and they are completely mutually exclusive. One of them has to go. We either have to say, the old Roadhog has to stay the way he is right now and he's never changing, which I think would have been a poor idea, but I think it would at least make a bit more sense than trying to have your cake and eat it too. Or they could have gone with, the actually good idea of reworking him into that more of a team player and just accepting that he isn't going to fit his old identity because there's no way they can make his old identity work in the current state of the game. I guess this has gotten a little bit far away from the point. Essentially what I'm trying to say is, characters only need a rework if they actually are going to have their identity change. Roadhog did not have his identity changed by this rework. He had the way that he achieves what he wanted to do, changed a little. Now you don't worry so much about getting stunned out of self-heal. Now when you go for the one-shot, you don't have to consider all this esoteric hook tech or positioning, or consider the different size hitboxes of all the characters, or consider the position you'll be hooking them into afterwards to try and kill them. Now instead it's just pigpen, hook, dead. It's like, well, I mean, I suppose that's easier, but it's sure a whole lot less engaging in my opinion. Essentially what I'm trying to get at is, I think I agree with this point to the point of saying that if a character isn't going to have their identity changed, you just want to give them new stuff because you're like, this character's a problem. We acknowledge they're a problem. we want to change them, question mark, question mark, question mark. If that's your approach, as it feels like it was with the Roadhog rework, then that's a huge problem. And if that is the approach they're taking, they don't need to rework that character. They simply just need to accept that character exists the way they are, unless they actually have a plan for how they want to reinvent them into a new identity that will be more healthy for the game. An example that's brought up in this section is Moira. There is a point in the Group Up podcast episode he's pulling from where someone says that they don't think Moira needs a rework, even though people talk about that. Because although Moira is by far the worst support in the game at high ranks, and no one uses her in Overwatch League and stuff like that, at the same time, they basically say, well, there's people who enjoy playing Moira, and they don't stop playing Moira just because she's not, like, super competitive at top level play. And if they enjoy playing Moira, and there's nothing really wrong with Moira, then, like, you know, there's no real point to reworking her. What would you even do, you know? And I think I half agree with that point. I definitely think that it's not urgent. I don't think Moira is in desperate need of a rework. I guess I would take it from this angle. I don't think that a character needs to be reworked because they are low skill ceiling, and that low skill ceiling means that they simply aren't good at high ranks because you cannot be that good with them even if you're a good player. As is the case with Moira. There is simply very little room for skill expression in Moira, so even if you were a god tier player who picked up Moira, you wouldn't do that much better than a gold Moira, just because there isn't that much difference between the way you play Moira between the ranks. You don't have that much opportunity to really show off your skill on the character. I don't think that inherently, like, warrants a rework. I think it's fine to accept certain characters in this game are not going to be super competitive because they are low skill and they do not deserve to be super competitive. I think that is fine. Let the low rank players have their fun with the character. Because when you try and say, whoa, hang on, we need this character to be good at high ranks, because every character needs to be good at high ranks if you're just good with them, even the characters that don't require much skill to be good with them at all, then you end up with Bastion. I mean, do I have to say more? I think we've all turned on Bastion over the course of Season 6 to now. And, I mean, I don't think I'm going to have to fight with people to argue that Bastion does not deserve to be as competitively viable as he was in Season 6, and arguably that he even still is, especially for a character that, while he's not skillless, clearly takes a lot less skill than most of the rest of the cast. But would I call for another rework to Bastion? No. I would call for them to simply reduce how strong Bastion is in general, certainly a lot of his free value, but honestly, I wouldn't mind if they left him the same from there. Just let him be kinda good at low ranks, and let him be fun for casuals to play, but don't let him dominate top ranks when he's an extremely low skill ceiling and unfun to play against character. As I say, I wanted to use Bastion as an example instead of Moira, because I do think Moira could actually benefit from a rework, not necessarily because she's low skill and isn't good and competitive, but mostly because she has no utility. And that means that it's kind of like, unless I just want to shut my brain off, why am I picking Moira? And the answer kind of is almost never. The only time I ever willingly pick Moira, other than when I just feel like playing Moira, is when I get into a situation where I get, like, backfilled into a game that's so fucking awful, like, we have no space, our talent can't stay alive for more than 2 seconds, even when I pump them full of healing, and essentially, every single 6 seconds I'm going to need to hit Fade to get away, otherwise I'm dead. In that situation, I'll pick Moira because, well, she has Fade every 6 seconds, and she can escape super often as a result. Other than that, though, yeah, I do not pick Moira very often, and I don't necessarily need her to be stronger, per se. I'm not asking for that, per se. I'm asking for her to have something that no other support has. It doesn't even have to be super impactful, but just something that's like, oh, I could only do this if I picked Moira, you know? That's the only reason why I still think she could benefit from a rework. But from a pure, like, oh, you know, she just doesn't have enough skill expression, I think it's fine if you have characters that aren't super great because they aren't super skill expressive, so long as they're fun. Okay, I know that was already a bit wrong-winded, but we've established our 5 rules to work with now.
Beginning with something easy and foundational, the DPS role. I think this role is best described as pressure creators, and by extension, space creators. Now you may be thinking, isn't that the tank's job? Well, yes and no. Let me explain. DPS create pressure through various means, whether it be the off angles a tracer takes, altering the map geometry like May's wall, accelerating access to a position like Sim's TP, or through the threat of their raw damage potential like Genji. These all effectively create space by forcing enemies out of position. So then, how do tanks differ? I would define tanks as the deniers. Not just space deniers, though most do just that. Each tank denies a specific aspect of the enemy team's advantage. Some tanks like Orisa deny space by being an unkillable wall. Shared between Orisa, Diva, and Sigma is the ability to deny utility through absorbing projectiles. Tanks like Ball and Doomfist deny both space and angles by literally pushing enemies out of position. Sigma baits utility through long-range damage pressure. He also, along with Ryan and Winston, denies utility, ult charge, and poke damage through intelligent shield usage. You'll note this category is very broad, but you'll also note that it does not require tanks to absorb utility by taking the full brunt of it. Most meta tanks have presence primarily through the threat of their lethality, coupled with abilities that allow them to mitigate the utility that is used against them. Alright, now we'll tackle...
Okay, so I know that was a long bit uninterrupted. I think this is important to bring up because it is kind of interesting that, like, they aren't very clear with what the defined, like, actual, like, what is the definition of DPS and tank and support in Overwatch. Like, a lot of it is, like, kind of easy to colloquially understand at a basic level, so I guess they just leave it at that, and I understand that to a newer player it's probably esoteric and irrelevant knowledge. But, like, I do think I got a bit of a problem with how I feel like, officially, while the community generally understands it, the official, like, conception of what does tank do, what does DPS do, and what does support do is very vague and blurry from Blizzard's side of things. I'm not a big fan of that. So I like this defining of each role. We'll get over to the support one soon. I just want to add this to the damage in the tank one. I'm kind of thinking about the way he defined DPS. I'm kind of moving over a bit to their definition. I think essentially it swaps between two. I think that there are kind of two things with DPS. You got your, like, I guess, reactive state and your proactive state. There's two types of DPS typically. A lot of people distinguish between main DPS and flex DPS. Your main DPS are your DPS characters that don't really need to use abilities to get kills. They just have a gun that is very good at their job, and they just shoot. Your soldiers, your Ashes, your Widowmakers, your Hanzos, they don't really need to use their abilities to get kills. They already have a gun for that, although their abilities help. Whereas flex DPS characters are typically DPS characters, they tend to be flankers, but not always, where they realistically can't really get kills without using their abilities. Because a lot of the times because they need to use them to get close, like most of the flankers, like Genji, Sombra, and Tracer. But in some cases, it can be for other reasons. Like Symmetra obviously needs to use her TP sort of to, like, reposition into ways that she can catch people off guard and get shots, because she just stares in front of someone and holds right click on people. She can get kills, but people are often able to get out of the way in time. So, you know, it's a lot more she's a lot more effective if she gets the element of surprise, which obviously means she has to use her teleporter and her turrets effectively. So that's another example. So I think in the case of the main DPS and the flex DPS, I think that they both kind of swap between different ideas when they are doing just proactive, like they don't have anything to deal with yet. They're just kind of like, well, the enemy tank's there, the team fight's starting, I guess I'll start shooting them. The main DPS will just start shooting the enemy tank. The flex DPS will probably start scouting out the area and looking for a flank to go for, but not necessarily start it yet. You know, if you're Sombra, you might be looking at the support backline while in invis, but not really starting an attack yet because you don't really have a good angle yet. You get the idea. And in that state, I feel like they are the pressurers. I think he's correct while they're in their proactive state, where it's like, we don't have anything to respond to yet. The team fight's just starting. We would have, you know, your soldier on high ground holding left click on the enemy Reinhardt, you know, pressuring his shield so that he can't hold it that much longer. It's going to break eventually. And so that denies certain angles and denies certain areas from the enemy team. And you've also got the flankers, your flex DPS, looking at the back, and because they are keeping an eye on the back line, that means that if the tank ever tries something, like enemy tank tries something risky and tries to extend really far forward, they're at risk at letting their supports die, because then just when the chaos starts, like, you know, obviously the flanker can just go get on their supports and pick them off while they're, like, distracted by the chaos. So yeah. But then once you get into a situation where, like, it's a bit more clearly defined that there's something on the enemy team is causing a problem, then I think the DPS shifts to the problem solver sort of role. Pharmacy completely shuts down a tank, because basically no tank in the game can fight back against Pharah or Echo. D.Va can do okay, but even D.Va is pretty awful at it. Ramatra, okay. Ball, okay, but even the tanks that, like, can fight back can barely fight back. So essentially, tanks can't do anything about a Pharah in the sky with a Mercy Pocket. Supports can do a bit more, but even supports can't do a lot. Maybe if they have no Mercy Pocket and Anna can just land 3 shots on a row on a Pharah and kill them. But if they have a Mercy Pocket, what? Does she have to land 6 shots in a row without missing a single one? 3 on the Mercy, then 3 on the Pharah, while being attacked by a Pharah and probably not getting any help, while still needing to heal everyone else on the team. It's quite a tall order. So that means it lies into the responsibility of the DPS. Usually whoever's playing hit scan needs to keep an eye on the sky and keep that pharmacy in check. If there's a Torb turret who is completely shutting down your tank's ability to advance without constant pocket, well, then guess whose job that is to fix? The main DPS should be shooting on that Torb turret and breaking it so that your tank actually has a bit more room to breathe without constantly having to deal with pressure from all angles. You get the point. So, yeah, I kind of had a completely different conception where I thought of the DPS as the problem solvers rather than the pressurers, but I did realize there was a relationship between DPS and creating space, even though it was explicitly the tank's job, not the DPS. And at first I just chalked that up to, well, I guess getting kills makes space, and, well, DPS get kills. But I think this might be a more complete definition of what DPS does by mixing these two together, where I think he is correct that they are the pressurers when you are being proactive, but I am correct that they are the, problem solvers when they are being reactive, if you get what I mean.
Probably the most challenging role to define. Support is extremely diverse. Commonly, they all heal, but that doesn't encapsulate all they have to do in a game. Ultimately, I think the term support is the most accurate description of this role. They prop up their teammates through healing, utility, or damage pressure. Good support players help their...
I want to make it clear, I mean, to be fair, I'm kind of speaking for him here, I might be wrong here, but I get the impression there's an implication sort of hidden in there with damage pressure. That might sound a bit like, well, what, supports aren't supposed to deal damage? Well, and most people, I guess, understand that supports do deal damage, but, they think, well, they shouldn't, they shouldn't be able to do loads of damage. But I think what should be important is not necessarily support shouldn't be capable of dealing loads of damage. I don't think that's necessarily correct. I think it should be that support's damage should come in the form of pressure rather than burst. So I think this is what's implied by calling it damage pressure rather than just saying damage. In that supports have damage that sort of is a warning. It's very rarely actually going to kill unless you actually seriously fuck up. It's more a, no, what do you think you're doing? Where do you think you're going kind of thing. And I think Anna's a perfect example of that. Anna's DPS is practically the same as McCree's, as Cassidy's, whatever, McCassidy's. If you compare them two, they are basically the same. And in fact, Anna has more shots in a clip and also can hit people from further away. So you'd think, what the hell? Anna's damage is way too high. But the reason why it balances out, at least usually, again, Anna's current power level right now is a completely different conversation, but short version is I think it's more about the context than her actually being too high in power level, and that they need to lower healing numbers generally in the game so that anti-nade isn't absolutely imperative as it is right now. But other than that, already talked about that in previous very long videos. The reason why Anna is fine to have 70 damage per shot, just like Cass, and even be able to do it from a further range with more ammo, despite the fact she's not a DPS, is Cass can headshot, and Anna can't. And that means that Anna doesn't have the same burst kill potential. And Anna can't two-tap someone out of nowhere. She has to land 3 consecutive shots in a row and have the target not get healed in that time. Which means that usually Anna doesn't just turn around a corner and just go, oh, you're dead, fuck you, Instead, it's like, oh, okay, someone's advancing forward. They're going into my line of sight. They think I'm not going to shoot them because I'm a support and I'm busy pocketing my tank. But my tank is, let's say the Sigma, they got grasp, they're about to use it. So they can deal with no healing for a moment. So let me just swap to this target. They think they can just push forward here. They're being a bit cheeky. They're a bit far away from their cover. And then it's like, shoot, shoot, shoot. And maybe you get the kill. But the thing is, you would only get the kill there if the enemy was dumb enough to walk into your line of sight and way too far away from cover for them to get to cover in time. And a lot of the time, your damage, instead of killing, is just used to ward people off. A lot of the time, it's just people take a step forward, you shoot them, and they take a step back and get back into cover. And you don't get a kill, but you do sort of maintain space by hitting them with that slap, just telling them, nope, you're not allowed to walk forward. Nope, don't you do it. It sounds like a joke, but genuinely, that is kind of how it works. So yeah.
Your team maintain and create space by sustaining them through the enemy's pressure. Support players often create the openings which allow their team to capitalize on a kill, whether that be through anti-nade, Kiriko or Yari headshots landing a pick, or Lucio speed boosting your team in for an aggressive play. But they can also stabilize a teamfight. Take a Lucio speed boosting your team out of danger, or ultimates like Zen's Trans and Mercy's Valk. I think support is by far the most versatile role, at least in Overwatch 2. Probably why it's the most played, but what they all have in common is the ability to press and stabilize their team's advantage.
Okay. I think I agree with the creating openings thing. This is a bit of an awkward one, because I agree that the creating openings one is true, but I have to have a sort of internal debate of whether that should be the case. I guess I would say, yeah. The only thing is, it kind of feels like it crosses a line where it feels like, well, that's the dive. Like, if you're playing a dive tank, that's your job. Like, if you're playing someone like Ball or Doom or Winston, it's kind of your job to create openings, and it can kind of feel like, oh, what the fuck? Supports get to do it too and have all these other bonuses? But I have to admit, in fairness, if you take that away from supports, then they don't really have the ability to be proactive. So I think, yeah, I'd have to agree on that one. I just had to think about that for a second, but I think I would have to agree. Because in fairness, even then, it's only really the dive tanks who create openings the same way that supports do, only through damage instead of utility. When you don't have that, like when you're playing like an anchor tank like Reinhardt, you don't really create as many openings. You still create openings every now and then. Like, if you land a fire strike on someone, that's kind of marking them for death. Like, your DPS should probably follow up and shoot that target now they're half health. But, like, obviously, clearly it's not the same thing. Clearly, jumping on top of someone as a Winston and Tesla canning them is a much greater signal to your DPS to go in than you're in the middle of a fight as a Reinhardt and you land one fire strike on the enemy brig and then, like, within 2 seconds they're back to full health because their other support just hit pumps them full of healing. You know? It's a bit of a different scenario. Especially because in the case of dive tanks, they often have tools to displace people, especially Wrecking Ball and Doomfist. Whereas, and that's obviously especially useful to negate healing. But in the case of people like, you know, Reinhardt, if they land a fire strike, they're not displacing people, they're just dealing damage. So if they do have enough healing, the enemy team could just instantly deny that opening. So yeah, I suppose, yeah, I would agree with that, because I think it only feels redundant when you're playing with a dive tank, and any other kind of tank, yeah, you kind of need the support to create the openings. Yeah, I think I agree.
With all that said, how do we actually use this when discussing balance? To elucidate on that, I'm going to present some of my concepts and criticisms about the game, and I'll explain how they are informed by my 5 rules. Hopefully, my concepts can serve as examples or starting points for your own ideas, which I'd love for you to share in the comments. Starting us off with Rule 3, I have this concept for a rework of anti-healing effects. Now, this comes packed.
Oh, I got excited when I heard that. Oh, I hit mute by accident. I got excited when I heard this one. Because you already know. Well, actually, I just realized most of you don't. So I made a video at the start of Season 6. Well, sorry, I guess midway through more like. That was a big video that I put a decent amount of effort into. That was essentially talking about how I felt it was more of a broad, this is the problem with the game just from a design perspective with every character right now, and this is what needs to be fixed. And essentially it was that, you know, talking about healing and damage power creep and all that, and it's really hard to condense into a small single point, but essentially a big takeaway from that video for me was that supports are way too strong and they do need to be nerfed, but also supports aren't even having that much fun because a lot of their strength comes from things they have just for existing, or things that are so simple and easy to do they aren't even really decisions, they're just things you are supposed to know to and are expected to do. And I felt like a lot of power in supports needs to be taken away from their self-survival and their ability to heal people, and more power needs to be given to their ability to make plays, create openings, and maybe use utility to sustain temporarily, but not necessarily just like insta press a button, now this person who was guaranteed dead isn't dead anymore. That kind of stuff. And I mentioned in that video the perfect solution is one that I don't think is going to happen. But I thought the perfect solution to this was we need to introduce anti-heal as a broad mechanic. And there's 2 ways it could happen. The way I'd like to see is similar to how Cauterize works in Paladins, where just simply every character in the game will take 50% reduced healing for like a second since the last time they took damage, anytime they are shot. So that they have to spend a second without getting shot to be able to get healed fully, and if they are being shot while being healed, the healing they received is halved. Something like that. And obviously the number could change. The other thing, the other idea was slightly more realistic, but in my opinion, a bit more clunky, and that would be to simply add anti-heal as an incidental benefit to multiple abilities in the game. And while that sounds like it might be really hard to do, there's actually already a lot of abilities which would easily suit anti-heal. They've already had an experimental patch back at the end of Overwatch 1 where Reinhardt had anti-heal on his Fire Strike, only it was a 90% rather than 100% anti-heal, which by the way means they've already done percentage-based anti-heal already. Like, they could keep Ana's identity of being the only character with 100% anti-heal on our Bionade, but they need to give anti-heal to other characters. Cass's Magnetic Grenade, why not give that anti-heal since everyone hates Hinder so much? Sojourn's Disruptor's Field, it lost its slow, why don't we just give it anti-heal instead of damage? You get the idea. There's a lot of things in the game you could easily give an anti-heal effect that I think would be cool, and I think this is slightly more realistic, but I have to admit I still think the perfect solution would just be giving the ability that all damage provides a very short anti-heal of 50%. I think that was the best way to go about it. As I say, as far as I see it, the main reason that Ana right now is like the strongest character in the game and is really, really not very well balanced is nothing to do with her power level being off the charts. She's received basically nothing but nerf after nerf after nerf after nerf in Overwatch 2, and at the end of Overwatch 1, Ana wasn't even the best support in the game. That would be, the best support combos were, it was mostly Zen Brig, but also Baptiste was especially good at the end of Overwatch 1. And yet, going into Overwatch 2, Ana has become one of the strongest supports in the game consistently, and no matter how much we nerf her, it seems like she doesn't get fixed. And as far as I'm concerned, that's because anti-heal literally is like necessary. If you don't have anti-heal, you can't get kills in the current version of Overwatch unless you can just like one-shot or burst kill. And in my opinion, the reason why these nerfs aren't quote-unquote fixing Ana, and why they are only like proving to make the game worse and worse, is because you can't really fix anti-heal. It should either be that anti-heal doesn't exist or everyone has it. Well, not literally everyone, but like, you know what I mean. Colloquially, most characters in the game should like be able to have it. You can't have this situation where only one character can have access to a utility so fundamentally important to being able to play the game effectively that if you don't have them, there's plenty of matchups that are just unwinnable. Alright, sorry about that. That went on a bit, but yeah, I just thought I need to explain that. I was about to say, oh, you already know, but I just realized a lot of you didn't see that video. Not only because I got a lot of new people come in since that video, but also because I had the goal to say I prefer 5v5 in the thumbnail of that video, and that meant that, of course, it got dislike bombed when it came out, and that actually really hurt the views of it, so it's unfortunate.
Healing effects. Now, this comes packaged with a whole lot of other reworks and changes for other heroes, following my second rule. But starting with Ana, her anti-name to function as a healing absorb rather than a full stop to healing for its entire duration. Where the actual balanced numbers lie will take some testing obviously, but let's say 200 for now. This could be displayed in-game with a purple outline on the health bar as it is now, but instead it fills up as you heal through the absorb, after which point the absorb would disappear and any remaining healing would apply normally. To counteract this huge nerf to the ability, the cooldown would be reduced quite substantially, perhaps some 3 to 5 seconds. So how does this change adhere to my 5 rules? Rule 1. Anti-nade no longer acts as a hard counter to Zen's ultimate. Though this matchup wasn't the worst because of the skill involved in baiting the CD, the decreased cooldown on nade should compensate for the lost potential aggression with a renewed capacity to stabilize your own team through Transcendence's duration, thus fitting our definition of support. Rule 2. Another matchup we've diversified with this change is against abilities like Hog's Take a Breather. Whereas before, anti-nade completely shut down Hog's sustain, now the Hog has a choice. Does he use some of his healing to push through the absorb, or can his support recover him? He's not resigned to death or hiding behind a corner now. The Hog has options without eviscerating the impact the Ana has in this matchup. Rule 3. With this rework, we fundamentally changed how anti-healing effects interact with players for the long-term benefit of the game. Additionally, this gives us further options for number tweaks beyond duration, as we can also adjust the absorb amount to either strengthen or weaken the ability as necessary. Rule 4. The impact of anti-nade is lessened, but in exchange we've made a more frequent and engaging ability. Beyond just the Ana, the opposing team is now presented with more diverse counterplay opportunities for this ability. Should they retreat to heal off the absorb, or should the BAP use regen burst to stabilize his team? Rule 5. With this change, we have given Moira's healing orb added utility and being a great method to clear the absorb from multiple teammates, all without changing Moira herself.
Okay, so I'm going to be a little bit critical of this idea. I want to make it clear right off the bat that this would be an improvement to the current anti-nade. If this was put in the game, I do think it would be better. But I think I could do it better. No, seriously though. Okay. I think that... Okay, throughout all the stuff that I said earlier about like everyone having anti-heal, that's the ideal world. I think that that would be the best way to have it. But that's not the world we live in. and accepting that's not the world we live in, if we don't have any drastic changes to the way the game works, if Ana still is the only character with anti-heal, don't say Junker Queen. I know, it doesn't count. Fuck you. Rampage is not used the same as an anti-nade. It is so infrequent. It's so easy to counter. It is not used like anti-nade is, and it's nowhere. The utility isn't comparable. So I essentially am just pretending that Rampage didn't exist for the purpose of this conversation. Anyway, Bionade on Ana, I feel like if you have to live in the world where we can't give everyone anti-heal, we can't make anti-heal like, I don't know, a DPS role passive, we can't do anything like that, and Ana is still going to be the only character in the game with anti-heal. If we have to live in that world, I honestly, I know this is the more boring change, but I feel like this is the better change. Like, make it 75% reduced healing instead of 100% reduced. Because it kind of follows all the same rules, where you can then decrease the cooldown, just like you said, creates more opportunities to sustain team or create openings, which fits really, really well with the support role, and it fits for rule 1, just like this does. Rule 2, consider every player in a given match. You know, it isn't as punishing versus Roadhog. Once again, Roadhog can still heal through it, just will get massively reduced healing. Balance 3, balance can't be, sorry, balance 3. Rule 3, balance can't be strictly numerical. You know, it changes the impact potential, and once again gives opportunity for numbers tweaks. Rule 4, control and counterplay are essential. You would obviously have counterplay if you can still heal through anti-heal. It'll just be severely reduced. You would have to consider, okay, do I still want to bother trying to heal, considering my heal is going to be severely reduced? But am I just in a situation where every bit of health is so valuable that it's still worth trying to heal through it? Certainly, that's going to add a lot more interesting decision-making to supports, where when your tank gets antied, but also you've got a couple DPS going on a flank route who've got a bit of health missing. Do you try and save your tank who's half health and antied and running away for his life, even though your healing's going to be cut in a quarter? Or you're going to try and heal the DPS, which don't really need it right now, but they are missing a good chunk of their health, and they are about to go in for a flank, which is more likely to fuck up if you don't heal them before they go. You're going to have these decision moments like that. Bingo. And finally, rule 5, I'm not going to lie, I don't really get the Moira healing orb one. Like, yeah, it removes the anti-heal absorb, but like every form of healing does. Like, that's not like a Moira thing. And if you mean because it's like an AoE heal, isn't like it still has a limit to how much you can heal before it runs out, and BAP's regen burst doesn't. So I feel like things like BAP and Brig Inspire and stuff like that would be better for that. So I don't think I really agree with that last one. As I say, I'm not trying to say this like is an awful idea. I think if this was put in the game tomorrow, it would be a better game. I guess my main problem with this is I don't like the idea of just making it a flat number, because you know how healing is in this game. Having even a small amount of healing already makes you ludicrously more powerful. I mean, you've seen how unkillable as Alari is with Pylon. Again, this was already said in a previous video, but for those of you who haven't seen it, Alari, despite the fact that I mostly play characters who have like very low deaths, like, you know, I really take to Lifeweaver, I really take to Ball, I really take to Sombra. It seems like the main characters I tend to be really naturally good at in this game are characters where when you know what you're doing, you never die on them. Those kind of characters. They're really the ones that click with me most of the time. And Alari, for the most part, didn't click with me, and yet despite that, she ended up being my 4th lowest death character in the entire game. Lower than Diva. Because literally just camping near Pylon made it so easy to stay alive. And Pylon only provides 35 healing per second. It doesn't provide a lot, but even just having 35 healing per second, if it's always there, and it just exists there, is enough to make you near unkillable as Alari, without getting jumped on by multiple people at once. And so that means that my death per 10 minutes on Alari becomes ludicrously low, and much lower than it should be, considering I'm not really a good Alari player. So what I'm getting at here is, this is going to do a lot to deny those sort of small healing things, but the thing is, this goes both ways. It's also really easy to get ludicrously high amounts of healing if you really want to in a game of Overwatch. If you need ludicrously high healing, you can run Ana BAP, just nade your tank, pump them full of healing darts and healing grenades, and then if they ever actually drop to near death, immortality field them, charge up your ult, and then drop amp matrix and use it to double all your healing, that tank's going to be immortal. I will admit, as frustrating as it is to play against anti-nades sometimes, it is a necessary evil in this game. If there wasn't any way to shut off healing, we would have games where there would be tanks who could just hold W into the enemy team and just walk through a bastion while being pumped with so much healing per second they just don't even feel the bastion bullets. That would be a consistent problem if that was the world we lived in. And I'm worried that if we did this kind of anti-heal, what would happen is that any kind of effective burst heal would cut right through this. And to be honest, they kind of seem to acknowledge this by bringing up the whole Transcendence point. The fact that anti-heal would basically be useless against Transcendence now. I don't see that as a good thing. Don't get me wrong, I think there's certainly something to be said about the idea that Transcendence is maybe countered a little bit too hard by anti-nades right now. I mean, it's a powerful ultimate that gets countered by a cooldown, not an ultimate, and that was a consistent problem talked about in other episodes of the Group Up podcast, especially talking about why tank felt so awful, that often tank ultimates are countered by support cooldowns that they only have to wait like 10 seconds for, whereas a tank might have to build up an ultimate for 2 minutes, only for one Kiriko Suzu to destroy the whole ultimate, which is, kind of shit. It just feels awful. So I think it's a similar problem here, where, to be honest, I feel like, while it might feel kind of bad when an anti-heal shuts down your Transcendence as Zen, this change doesn't fix that. Now it just becomes, what's the counterplay to Transcendence? And the answer is nothing. You throw an anti-nade on someone and you prevent them from getting healed for literally 2/3 of a second. That's not a number I pulled out my ass. Transcendence heals 300 health per second. If you put a 200 healing absorb, that means you would only prevent the Transcendence for 2/3 of a second before they would be back to infinite healing practically and basically invincibility. It would mean there was no counterplay to that, which is, I obviously have a problem with that. Whereas if you just go with the simpler option of the percentage-based anti-heal, Transcendence would then have its healing per second reduced to 75, which is, while that's still a lot, that's enough that you can break through it and maybe kill someone if you anti them, while it also doesn't shut down the ultimate, because it's not like Zenyatta isn't providing a lot of healing. 75 healing per second is more than a Mercy Beam provides, and it's to all people on your team at once, which does add up to a lot of healing if you're using it effectively. It just won't be enough to make people literally invincible. So I feel like that is an example of having better counterplay. Once again, I don't want to be too harsh on this idea. I think this idea is better than what we have right now. But I definitely feel like I don't understand why overcomplicate this with the idea of, it absorbs this much healing, but then it stops working when we hit this threshold. Because it feels like that just leaves it open to being destroyed by especially high bursts of healing and being completely knocked out of being useful, and then making it unable to deal with just walls of healing. Yeah, especially Orisa. Think about Orisa. Already it felt bad trying to kill an Orisa when they had an Ana and a BAP just pumping them full of a ludicrous amount of healing, and you just couldn't ever get through them. And yeah, you're supposed to kill the Ana or the BAP, but because of support power creep, now they're so self-sufficient, you can't even really get a chance to pick them off to stop the Orisa from getting healed. And yeah, now you get in this situation where you just have an impenetrable wall, and the only thing that could have stopped it was anti-heal, and oops, we removed that. You can see why I've got an issue with that. Anyway, moving on.
Also, Ana's grenade stays largely the same gameplay-wise. Barring the more frequent usage, Ana players should find this change just as engaging as before. Another rework I'd make to support this change to anti-healing effects is to Kiriko's Protection Suzu. This should also mend...
Ooh. Okay, I obviously I've already seen this, but I want to say before I even get into this, I might be a bit harsh with this one too, but I want to be clear, I don't necessarily blame them for the fact that I don't like this idea, because quite frankly, I'm going to be very hard to please with Suzu. I think Kiriko is literally such a awfully designed character, they might have to literally just throw her in the trash and restart. I say that as if it's going to happen. I know it's not going to happen. I know we're going to have to just live with what we've got. But Kiriko is just so fundamentally broken and flawed in every element of her design that, Jesus Christ, where do we even start? And Suzu's probably the biggest, problem there. So, to be fair, without drastic character redefining changes, there's not much you can do. But I will talk about the changes he did suggest and my problems with them.
Much of the frustration with the ability. I'd remove the cleanse effect, shorten the invulnerability, potentially remove the intangibility, and allow it to burst heal for 70 or more baseline. Also, to compensate for this considerable nerf, I'd reduce the cooldown by some 2 to 5 seconds. If we were to remove the intangibility effect, I would append that with immunity to stuns or knockbacks for the duration. The idea being that Doomfist would be stopped as if punching a fortified Orisa instead of slipping right through them. Alright, so how have my 5 rules informed this idea? Rule 1. Using our definition of support, Kiriko can sustain her team through moments of lethal burst damage with a well-timed Suzu. Rule 2. If we reduce the cooldown of Suzu significantly, I think increasing Swift Step's cooldown by 1 to 2 seconds would help in giving her moments of vulnerability. Her wall climb passive is already a strong evasion tool, and Swift Step is a fun but often annoying ability when on the opposing end. Rule 3. The removal of Cleanse with the addition of a consistent heal diminishes its effectiveness against anti-nade while remaining a strong counterplay when your whole team is hit. Furthermore, Suzu no longer hard counters ultimates like Shatter and Rampage. The latter we'll get into in a moment. Rule 4. The reduced cooldown of Suzu along with the removal of Cleanse produces skill expression through fast reaction times. It is still possible to stop an Earth Shatter with some really good timing or an apt prediction. No Cleanse and shorter invulnerability reduce her impact when teleporting into a 1v1. Increasing the Swift Step CD would also expand the window of opportunity to punish the Kiriko in these situations. Finally, Rule 5. We keep the most fun aspects of Suzu, like timing it to survive a Diva Bomb, negating a Doomfist Punch, or avoiding being burned by Ash's dynamite. All of these are still possible with some pinpoint reactions or predictive timing. Finally,
Okay. Oh boy. I do like the idea of increasing the cooldown of Swift Step to increase and compensate for the more frequent personal Suzus. Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Considering every player in a given... Why is that under the thing of considering every player in a given match, though? I must admit, I don't really get that, unless it's just supposed to be like, oh, it's unfun when a Kiriko TP's away, which I guess I agree with, but I feel like that doesn't really fall under the second rule, but okay. Balance cannot be strictly numerical. I completely disagree that the cleanse is the most frustrating part of component of Suzu. I think the most frustrating part is the invulnerability, but we'll get back to that. Control and counterplay are essential. Well, that would mean that Suzu rewards fast reductions predictions, shorter invuln, and longer TP cooldown equals fairer 1v1s. And rule 5, not everything needs to rework. Suzu maintains the fundamental feel and prevention aspect. Okay, I'm gonna be real with you. Oh boy. I think that there is no way to make Suzu fair without literally just starting again. But there is a change you could make that would make it significantly better, at least. I think the best thing you can do, and I know that no one's going to... Well, I say no one's going to like this. I think a lot of people actually like this, but I mean, like, Kiriko players probably aren't going to like this. I think that simply giving a support and ability that grants a short period of complete invulnerability with absolutely no way to prevent or play around it was a stupid idea in the first place. I feel like it's fundamentally just not a good idea. There is no counterplay to a Suzu. The only counterplay to a Suzu is to pray the Kiriko doesn't have it because it's on cooldown. That's the only counterplay to Suzu. There is no real counterplay to Suzu. It can come down at any time, it can negate anything in the game, and there's nothing you can do about it. And that's because it provides complete invincibility with absolutely no room for changing anything except the time window, which might make it harder to time, but that doesn't change how potentially potent it is. And if it's potent enough to survive infinite amounts of damage with absolutely no way to get around it, then, well, shit, you know, you don't have any counterplay, do you? So, this is what I would say. I would say the removed intangibility is a decent idea, but they need to reverse this. It should keep the cleanse effect, and it should lose the invulnerability. They could, if they wanted to, make it a damage resistance, like maybe a 75-50% damage resistance for the brief time. I know that's not as snappy and, you know, satisfying, but Jesus Christ, invulnerability on demand on a support is a really fucking bad idea, even for a short window. I don't think this was ever a good idea to put in the game, and I feel like it has produced nothing but misery. And I'm not gonna lie, I don't think the Suzu would make it any better. I feel like it would remove the one part about Kiriko I actually like, that she is the only support in the game who can cleanse negative debuffs, which does feel like a very important utility for someone to have the ability to do. The fact that we now have no one to do that is extremely awful in my opinion. But then on top of that, it doesn't actually address the problem with Suzu. It makes it even more of a get-out-of-jail-free card. It makes it just a, I press the button and then I don't die. I press the funny, like, insta-live button and I survive 50 ultimates because I pressed it at the right timing. And it's like, okay, wonderful. Great we have that in the game. You know, there's nothing that feels worse than just, oh, I'm about to kill someone that's nowhere near any of their teammates, but then their Kiriko teleports through 5 walls, lands on top of them, Suzu's them, and then by the time they're out of invulnerability, they're back to full health, and now I die. I don't just not get the kill, I die, because now I'm in a 2v1 against a full health enemy with a Kiriko pocketing them that wasn't there a second ago and teleported to them through walls. You can see why I think that Kiriko is so fucked from the beginning that, like, the only way we could really fix her is completely reinvent the character, and I know that's not happening, so that's why I've got to give some credit. I understand that you're working within limitations here, but if I had the choice, I would say that Suzu no longer gives invincibility, it still cleanses, it heals more, it has a shorter cooldown, maybe it gives damage resistance, maybe it doesn't, I don't know. I don't really even like the idea of giving it damage resistance, because it doesn't really feel in flavor, I guess, for Kiriko, but at the same time, I think you probably would need to, because if it was just a burst heal, it'd probably need to do a lot of healing to be good, and if that's the case, then I think it would get very scary very quick, because I don't like the idea of having a massive burst heal on a short cooldown that, like, it's just press button, health bar instantly goes to full, you know? So maybe 50% damage reduction with 80 heal, I don't know. You get the idea. I did also have an idea that maybe I could throw in there. I'm not gonna lie, I'm kind of just throwing this in there as a bonus, because I'm not gonna lie, one thing that I think I've realized is, obviously I'm kind of biased because I think that Kiriko is one of the least fun supports in the game to play, and I feel like not only do I hate playing against her, but I don't even enjoy playing as her, when I enjoy almost every support in this game. Even supports that I used to hate, like Baptiste, eventually grew on me, whereas Kiriko went the opposite direction, where at first I thought that I just didn't get how to play her, but then after months and months and months I realized, oh wow, this really is just how you play her. This fucking sucks. Obviously I might be kind of biased because of the fact that I hate playing her so much, but I gotta say, I feel like Suzu is not only the most frustrating ability in the game to play around, because there's no counterplay and it's just simply, you just have to play knowing at any moment everything you're doing could be denied just because the Kiriko decided they wanted to ruin your day today. But on top of that, I think it's really miserable that Suzu isn't even fun to use as Kiriko. I'm not gonna lie. I don't know, like, I guess there's probably some people out there who actually get really excited when they use a Suzu to dodge a Diva Bomb or whatever, but I'm not gonna lie, to me it's just kind of like the bare minimum. It feels like expected I'm going to do that. It doesn't feel like a big sick play. It feels like, yeah, that's just what I do. It's like, you know, when a Reinhardt goes to ping you as Anna, you hit them with a sleep dart. Now, don't get me wrong, it's good that you did that, but it doesn't really feel like a fucking pop-off moment as the Anna there. It's obvious that you were going to sleep dart him. What else were you going to do? And it's not difficult to sleep dart him because he's right there and he's a huge target and he's got restricted movement. Of course you're going to sleep dart him. It just feels like the bare minimum. It feels like what you're expected to do rather than something you can pop off about and be like, yes, I outsmarted them. It feels the same kind of for me with Kiriko Suzu. It feels like I never think to myself, yeah, I outsmarted the opponent. When I use Suzu, it feels like, yeah, I got to bullshit my opponent and win a fight I had no business winning, you know? Anyway, so for that reason, I was thinking whether you could try and make Suzu a bit more like Nade, where it has both defensive and offensive utility, so it can be used more both to do the sustain and create an opening. And I did have the idea that since it cleanses debuffs from allies, what if it doubled the effectiveness of debuffs on enemies? So maybe it would, if you did through a hacked enemy, their ability lockout duration would be doubled, if they, you know, it hadn't already run out, or if you threw it at a enemy who's on fire, they would take double damage from the fire, or if they were antied, then it would last twice as long. You get the idea. That'd be an interesting utility, but I have to admit that would be a bit more out there, and I'm not sure if it really addresses problems. It just kind of makes it a little bit more fun and quirky to use, and maybe a bit more thought goes into it, but it wouldn't necessarily address how bad it feels when Suzu is used to completely deny one of your pushes, especially when Kiriko just TPs and Suzu's instantly, and it's just like, well, I didn't even know she was there, and there was no way for me to know she could have done that, you know? Yeah, I don't blame them too much that I'm not super on board with this rework, though, just because, like, there's just nothing you can do with this.
All of these are still possible with some pinpoint reactions or predictive timing. Finally, let's talk about Queen's ultimate given this healing absorb concept. Very simply, I'd have her apply the same effect as our reworked anti-nade, except this would have a slightly larger absorb. Of course, adhering to Rule 2, we must consider how our reworked Suzu would interact with this ult. Seeing as the only impact Suzu would have in this matchup is the burst heal or potential to deny the ultimate with good timing, perhaps an absorb of 300 would be manageable. Of course, subject to...
I get what you're saying with the whole Kiriko can't cleanse Junker Queen ult anymore. Listen, I play a lot of Junker Queen, and yeah, it sucks to get Suzu'd by like a Kiriko. It sucks when that happens. But I'm not gonna lie, I don't like getting rid of Cleanse. I do think it improves this matchup specifically, but I don't think the benefits outweigh the harms caused by it. There are simply some characters that live on Suzu. Like, Mauga and Roadhog need Suzu, in particular. Like, they don't need it all the time, but there's some matchups, some maps with some enemy teams where if you just don't have Suzu, you're fucked. And I think not having the cleanse would be a detriment to those characters. And yes, I understand it's a, good thing for people like Junker Queen with her, ultimate, but I'm not gonna lie. I've come to... Don't get me wrong, I still fucking hate having to deal with Kiriko as Junker Queen, but I've come to realize I don't think it's as bad as you think. You see, here's the thing. Yes, a cooldown can count your entire ultimate, and yes, that shouldn't be the case. However, I do think there is actually... I can't believe I'm saying this about Kiriko for once, but, I mean, this is I have found this over time. I do think there is some room for counterplay when it comes to Suzu, when it comes to specifically this ultimate. It seems like there isn't at first, because what? You just use the ult and then they just Suzu. And yeah, you can wait for them to use their Suzu, but then if you wait for that, then, if this Kiriko's smart, they just won't use Suzu. They'll just wait for you to use ult. And it's like, well, shit, I never get to use my ult. And yeah, she's also holding on to her cooldown, but because it's a cooldown, not an ultimate, she's getting more value out of denying my ult just by not using Suzu than I'm getting value out of denying her Suzu by not using ult. And that is true. However, this is the big catch. Suzu's splash radius is tiny. And in my experience, the best way to counter, a Kiriko trying to counter your, Rampage, the best way to still get value off of Rampage is to simply bite the bullet eventually. If you can't bait Suzu, just accept you're going to get Suzu'd, but wait for the enemy team to scatter. Don't just oh, I see 4 people, press button, go, Instead, it's wait for people to get a bit more split up, because the enemies will never group up in my experience. I never see people huddle up around the Kiriko and all get Suzu'd at once. The Kiriko might ask their teammates, no, come here over here, huddle up, but they never do, especially because the ult tends to make them panic. And so everyone scatters, and the Suzu can still come down, and she can still cleanse someone. But in my experience, a lot of the time, I can rampage 3 people, and the Kiriko Suzus herself and no one else, and the other 2 people die. And yeah, that doesn't feel as good as getting all 3, but at the end of the day, I still got value off of my ult. I'm taking that. It's much better than just holding on to it all game. So, yeah, I don't think it's as... don't get me wrong, I do think Suzu is shit to play against, and I think it'd be better if it wasn't like this. But I do think the cleanse is valuable enough that I wouldn't want to remove it just for the sake of making this interaction less annoying. Especially because, while I do think it's frustrating to deal with, I don't think there's nothing you can do as the Jungle Queen. I think you just have to play around it and play a bit slower and play a bit smarter. And while it's not the most fun way to deal with it, it is a way to deal with it.
Testing. Bring back experimental mode.
Okay, that's based. I know this is not a hot take at all, but seriously, why the fuck have they not brought back experimental mode? Jesus Christ, they need it.
Alright, now, how does this conform to rules 1, 3, 4, and 5? Well, rule 1, as it did before, Rampage still denies healing to the impacted targets, thus fitting our definition of tanks being deniers. 3, as this change is largely identical to Ana's, I think the same point applies here. 4. Supports other than Kiriko have gained a dynamic in this matchup as they all have the ability to heal through the absorb. I think Lucio would be the most interesting because he gets the choice between amping speed or healing depending on the situation. 5. Just like our Ana rework, Rampage's impact stays largely the same. Of course, we'll need to test and monitor the absorb amount to ensure the ult remains impactful without being uncounterable. So that was probably my most
Okay, you know what? What I was initially going to say to this was same as the Ana one. I don't see why it can't just be a percentage based. I think that would be better. That's it. But to be fair, I think in the case of Junker Queens, it might be interesting to give it something different. And make it so that the Ana's is percentage based, but the Junker Queen's anti-heal is the absorb idea. I think you could maybe make that work if you also made it so that Rampage actually did damage on impact, because I believe Rampage applies the DOT, it applies the anti-heal, but doesn't actually do any damage on impact. If you made it so it did some damage on impact and made the damage over time more effective, and then added the heal absorb, maybe I could get behind that. Maybe. I definitely think the biggest downside of Rampage right now, besides it being countered by Suzu, is the fact that it does feel like there's no counterplay to it if you're not Kiriko and you're a support. And being able to heal through that a little bit would be nice, even though that is both the case with the percentage-based and the, numbers-based. But I feel like it probably would feel a little bit better as, Junker Queen, because usually when you use ult as Junker Queen, it's panic, quick, capitalize, capitalize, capitalize. Whereas when you throw an anti-nade with Ana, often you're not really in a position to capitalize yourself. You're kind of hoping, crossing your fingers, your team goes in. So I kind of don't like the heal absorb on Ana, because, again, I think people just burst heal, and your team will be too slow to react to you landing the anti-heal, and by the time they go to capitalize on it, they've already already like burst through the healing like barrier, and they're already receiving full healing again. Whereas in Junker Queen's case, because she can actually go in the second the like heal absorb hits, I guess you could take more advantage of that window where they aren't receiving healing before their healing gets up. And that does, he's about to mention, it adds like thought, like if you're Lucio, do you speed or heal? That's a great example, because it's like, oh, if you've got the heal absorb, maybe you want to amp it up and heal, but if the Junker Queen's got her axe ready and is ready to axe your other support the second that she lands the ult, and you aren't going to break through the heal like absorb before the axe hits, then maybe you're better off getting speed to get her away from the axe. Yeah.
Complex rework idea. Now, I'd like to take a step back and look at just one ability, specifically Baptiste Lamp. This suggestion is nothing new, but simply put, I change Immortality Field to Damage Reduction Field.
This is another one coming from the Group Up podcast. Yeah, this is one of those ideas that at first sounds clunky, and at first sounds like, oh, come on, that's ruining the identity of the character. But, like, let's be real. From day one, we all knew Immortality Field was a bad idea, and yep, Immortality Field was a bad idea. And we just doubled down on it because, well, he's in the game now. But quite frankly, I don't think anyone would have a problem with a damage reduction field. I personally would even prefer a damage reduction field. Like, genuinely, even as the Bat player, I think I would have more fun using a damage reduction field than Immortality Field. I don't like how Immortality Field is always either the most useful thing in the game or the most useless thing in the game, whereas a damage reduction field would reward the exact same sort of skills, but would do it regardless of whether people hit a certain health threshold or not. And I would prefer that so much more.
Now, I have heard the argument that this doesn't fit the name, but honestly everyone calls it Lamp anyway. Ignoring the precise numbers of the damage reduction and lamp health for the sake of the video, let's focus on how this change fits my rules. First of all, the overall function of Lamp being a tool to save and stabilize your team is kept. Second, I want to consider how this affects the sniper matchup. Personally, I often use Lamp to peek Widows, and this is absolutely still possible. However, the Widow is now given a chance to kill me with a skillful set of headshots, or at least force me to back up, because if I get hit, I know there is nothing preventing me from dying to a follow-up shot. Rule 3. We've removed
And I think that's fine so long as it takes multiple shots, so yeah.
The most frustrating component of Lamp, the immortality. It is now technically possible to kill a target in a lamp, though it may be extremely difficult. This leads to Rule 4. We diversify the skill expression of Lamp on both sides. As the BAP, you no longer waste the lamp if you place it early. There's utility in preventing bursts of damage or allowing your other support to reload. On the opposite side, you are now presented with a choice. Do you switch targets to the lamp and break it, or should you try to burn your target through the damage reduction? Perhaps you have a knockback to push them out of the lamp's radius. Regardless, there is more control and more counterplay. I'd also argue this change adheres to Rule 5. This is not a complete rework of his kit. The lamp still exists to prevent your teammates from dying. BAT players who enjoy him now will continue to do so. If anything, this change could allow for a major cooldown reduction, allowing for multiple lamps to be used.
Yes, and that's the big one. Okay, so that one is a home run. That one I don't have anything against. Like, in fairness, that's not really his idea, quote unquote. A lot of people have suggested that idea, but even still, I'll give credit. I fully agree with everything he's got to say there. Like, I think the lamp one is a perfect idea.
Those are just a handful of ideas informed by my 5 rules. But before I leave you, let's return to those questions I presented at the start of the video. So, what is fun in the context of Overwatch? Overwatch is a game with 39 unique heroes, and that roster is still growing. I think, universally, players have the most fun when they master any one or multiple of these kits in all kinds of scenarios. Hero swapping is a fun and integral part of the game, but should never be compulsory. Removing situations where you're forced to swap produces diversity for hero interactions and combos, and allows players to play the heroes that they identify with most. So, how can we craft concepts that solve issues long term? If we keep in mind the 5 rules I laid out in this video, we're forced to consider all the angles and complexities that balancing a game like Overwatch presents. We have the tools to not only craft our own ideas, but to help each other polish theirs. We are an increasingly diverse community of players from all backgrounds and skill levels. It is important that we can all have fun and enjoy this game we've invested so much of our time and love into. So remember to be kind to each other. Can we balance this game to be both fun and competitively viable? Probably one of the oldest questions in gaming in general, and this question is still hotly debated to this day. In my opinion, yes, we can. When we diversify counterplay opportunities, we create more instances of skill expression. Overwatch is at its best in terms of both fun and competitiveness when your skill as a player is displayed in your decision-making and mechanical skill. The most frustrating mechanics in Overwatch are often the least competitive. On the other hand, the most fun abilities are the ones which allow both that hero and anyone playing against them to make inspiring plays that turn the tide of a fight. Also, this type of balancing would improve Overwatch as an esport. After all, the most fun pro play matches to watch are the ones where they pull off crazy combos and counterplays in novel ways. That is the version of Overwatch we should be vying for. So,
I'm glad that they made I was a bit worried in this conclusion at first, when they talked about the fun versus competitive thing, because I feel like there's a trap that people fall into, that these things are somehow mutually exclusive, when in reality, a lot of that impression comes from the fact that a lot of the times we have mechanics in this game that are anti-competitive, that are very much anti-skill expression, and they shouldn't be the way they are. And a lot of the times they only exist and persist in the game as a result of inertia, or as a result of stubbornness with a character, where there'll be a character who simply promotes boring, low-skill gameplay, and we won't address it for years on end because that's their identity, and we're not allowed to mess with their identity. That's just their hero fantasy. We're not allowed to touch that. And yet we watch the game burn around us as we cling on to that precious hero identity of one character that not even a lot of people play. You know, we've seen this before with Roadhog, but we've seen it also with Brig. We've seen it multiple times before over the course of this game's life. How many times do we hear hero fantasy come out of the words of the developers when talking about changes made to someone, and then 2 seconds later they're burning the game down in flames? Not that hero fantasy doesn't mean anything, but when it stands in the way of fun and skill-expressive play, it doesn't just make the game less competitive, it makes the game less fun. I think that some people get the idea that competitive and fun is different because they have unfun competitive games, not because the game is competitive and they're having to learn how to play competitively, but they're not having fun because the current thing that is competitive is not skill expressive, and that should not be the case. When you actually are in a meta where whatever is good takes skill, and whether you win or not depends on your actions, being competitive is what's fun in this game. Even if you are a casual and you aren't looking to rack up win rates, get high ranks in ranked and all that, even if you are playing casually, this game is its most fun when you are expressing your skill, when you are achieving things based on what you are doing. I feel like what I'm saying is extremely basic and obvious, but I still feel like somehow this goes in one ear and out the other when it comes to the developers of this game, because I feel like a lot of the time there's sort of this attitude like, oh, but the low skill characters are fun for casual players. And while certainly there are people who enjoy some of these characters, really, even for low skill players, how many of you are enjoying your low skill characters? How many of you are enjoying having to pick Bastion every game to melt the Reinhardt, whether you really want to play Bastion or not? You get the point I'm trying to make. I'm very much glad that they managed to sort of break down the dichotomy between fun and competitive. Because being competitive and being fun is the same thing when what's competitive is the same thing that is the most skill expressive. And that only stops being the case when the least skill expressive characters in the game are the ones that are given the keys to the kingdom.
what balance ideas do you have? How would your concepts fit the framework I've presented? Maybe there's more I should have mentioned? Perhaps you disagree with some of my ideas. Let's start a conversation and learn from each other. Thanks for listening. I hope you all have a wonderful day.
I hope you like the conversation. Don't know if, I suppose since this is a smaller channel, there's a decent chance they might see this. So, hi, if you are seeing this, SoloWolo. Good video overall, I gotta say. Yeah, speaking of which, shout outs to them. Anyone wants to check out their channel, go ahead. I will definitely try and remember to link them in a pinned comment in the description. Yeah, as I say, I do have some criticisms of some of these reworks you got, but I do think the philosophy and the idea you got here is absolutely the right way to be going. I know this isn't groundbreaking. I know that this isn't the first person who's ever proposed this sort of idea. But the thing is, maybe I'm off base here. Maybe this is just because I only got really into Overwatch towards basically at the very end of Overwatch 1. And that means that, like, I'm kind of a bit behind the rest of the community, where I might have been there since 2016. I wasn't really an Overwatch player in 2016, you know? So I wasn't really in the community back then. as a result, maybe this is just from me being an outsider. You know, there are a lot of people who are kind of... I'm not in the TikTok Overwatch sort of group that most new Overwatch 2 players are, but I'm also not in the OG group, so I guess I find myself in this weird midpoint. So maybe it's just because of that, but I get the feeling that while there are plenty of OG experienced players that understand these concepts, no one really talks about them openly, and so that makes me get the feeling that there might be a large portion of the community that just has no idea of these concepts, just because they don't think about them and no one talks about them. Everyone just plays the game and they just say, oh, I hate it when this happens, I hate this, and that's just where the analysis stops. Oh, I hate it when I get anti'd, nerf Anna. That's where it stops, you know? We don't really think about it any deeper. So even if to some people you might be thinking, if you're a more experienced Overwatch player, oh yeah, I already knew all this isn't rocket science, this isn't anything new, I still think videos like this are important because I feel like a lot of this isn't really talked about, and there is a huge portion of the community that doesn't understand this. And I'm not even saying that to, like, you know, I guess call them out, because I mean a lot of these people are more casual players and I wouldn't expect them to understand this without being told. So, you know, with all that said, I know this is a bit of a long one, but thank you for watching. Subscribe to SoloWolo, I guess. I might, if I see I'll see if they'll like their other videos as well. This is the only one I've seen. And see you next time. Goodbye.